Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today, especially our panelists, one of whom just got off the plane from South Africa a few hours ago. So thank you, Nikki, for being here. To all of our panelists, we appreciate your willingness to take time out of your schedules to be here. Thank you. I'll also extend a thank you to Gibson Dunn for allowing us to use their conference room today as our space upstairs is being renovated. We have a little bit of a microphone shortage, so we'll have to share this one and this handheld one. We have a distinguished panel here today to discuss a very pressing situation in the Balkans. As we've heard in the news for the past several months, unprecedented numbers of refugees and migrants have been entering and transiting through Greece, Macedonia, and Serbia on their way to Hungary and ultimately to Germany or other countries in Western Europe. Some in the European Union recently agreed to accepting quotas for settling refugees and migrants, but the quota measure is not unanimously accepted by member states. Moreover, the tide of refugees and migrants is not abating and is expected to become more dire as the weather gets colder. In such conditions, host countries, whether or not they accept that role, are having to adjust their security and legal responses to a large group of foreigners transiting through their countries. Recently, we learned that Hungary is handling the security and legal challenges in a variety of manners, depending on where the migrants cross into Hungary. For example, if a refugee crosses on the Croatian border, Hungary transports him or her for free through Hungary and then releases him or her to cross into Austria on foot. At the Serbian border, however, the situation is markedly different. Migrants are arrested in Hungary and face criminal charges under a new law that makes it a crime to breach Hungary's new border fence. If found guilty, the migrant is often sentenced to expulsion from Hungary, and as a consequence from the entire Schengen zone, the very region where many refugees seek to settle. In these cases, Hungary is not considering possible asylum cases of the migrants. These conditions in Hungary highlight the importance of tackling this challenging situation with both security considerations and respect for the legal status and rights of the migrants, whether or not they are refugees. To deepen our understanding of the situation, we have four distinguished panelists here today to offer their perspectives. First, we are honored today to host two ambassadors from Macedonia and Serbia. First, we'll hear from His Excellency Vasko Nomovski, Ambassador of the Republic of Macedonia, to describe the current situation in Macedonia and the country's response. Second, His Excellency George Matkovic, Ambassador to the Republic of Serbia, will share the latest update from that country, where many refugees are spending more time as Hungary closes its borders. We'll hear next from Metodia A. Kaloski of the United Macedonian Diaspora.
Macedonian, it would be
Okay, that's what I was thinking. About the security concerns highlighted by the influx of foreigners to the region. And finally, we'll hear from ABA Roli's Nikki Dasarathi about our programs in Turkey providing legal aid and assistance to Syrian refugees, and how that can inform and provide lessons in dealing with the crisis in the Balkan region. So we'll hear from each panelist for about 10 to 15 minutes and then leave a few minutes for questions at the end. Ambassador Nomovski, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, dear friend, Ambassador Matkovic, representatives of the American Bar Association, Rule of Law Initiative, Mr. Kolsky, other friends and guests. It is a pleasure to address this event, and thank you for organizing an event on this topic, because sometimes we feel that the countries that are affected by this crisis are left alone, and the only discussions about this topic are taking place in our countries, not even in the countries that are on the front line of the European Union. So Macedonia has been part of the European integration process as a candidate country. So we are not full member of the European Union, neither is Serbia. Unfortunately, it is Macedonia and Serbia which are protecting the European Union territory in this case. Macedonia is probably the only country that receives refugees from the European Union. The route of the refugees does not include airplanes from Syria to Macedonia or Serbia. It is a route that goes through Turkey, Greece, and then enters Macedonia. As you know, the most popular route includes traveling by boat from Turkey to the Greek islands, and then the Greek authorities are transferring the refugees to the border with Macedonia. So I am emphasizing that Macedonia is not part of the European Union. It is a candidate country. However, we are the ones that are doing the registration of the refugees, that are doing the fingerprinting, and that are, in a way, organizing the overall chaos with the refugees entering the territory of Europe. The most popular route, as I said, is from Turkey to Greece and to Macedonia, then going to Serbia and Hungary if the border is open, if not Croatia, and then Austria, Germany, and Sweden. Neither Macedonia nor Serbia are the final destination for these refugees. We are only territory where they pass through. The final destination is usually Germany and Sweden, according to the statements of the refugees themselves. The whole situation started to escalate somewhere in the month of June of this year. And since 19th of June, when the registration began until now, we have over 140,000 refugees that have entered Macedonian territory, and only 50 of them have remained on the territory of Macedonia, so 50. The rest, over 140,000, have continued north to Serbia and then to the common European space in the Schengen area. The situation began, as I said, getting worse in the months of July and August. In the last few weeks of September and October, we have 5,000 to 7,000 refugees per day. And you can imagine what is the burden on the Macedonian authorities, having in mind that Macedonia is a country of 2 million. So a country of 2 million has received over 140,000 refugees in the last nearly 4 months. It is nothing new for Macedonia. Macedonia has been the primary destination for the refugees from Kosovo in 1999. At that time, Macedonia received over 360,000 refugees, which is nearly 18% of the Macedonian population. So 18% would be something like 60 million refugees in the United States, 60 million refugees in the United States. This is the ratio that Macedonia has managed to overcome in 1999. So we do have some experience with welcoming refugees. Out of those 360,000, there are, so 16 years later, we have still nearly 1,000 refugees living on the Macedonian territory, mostly from the Roma population that are not allowed to go back to Kosovo at this point. So to get back on the refugee crisis that we are facing today, given all the experiences and the camps from the Kosovo crisis, we do work with a number of international organizations, with the UNHCR, with the International Red Cross, but the dominant burden is on the Macedonian authorities and the Macedonian budget. So far, we have declared commitment of 90,000 euros assistance from the European Union, and we are still waiting for commitments on a longer term. There was an announcement that the European Union is going to transfer 17 million euros for Macedonia and Serbia. However, they were determining the amount based on the pre-accession funds that are already existing for the countries that are candidate countries. So it is nothing new from the European budget. It is an existing budget that is supposed to be adjusted, and instead of cross-border for cooperation, for example, we will have assistance for the refugees. But even those amounts are not certain yet. For example, in 1999, after the crisis in Kosovo, Macedonia requested a certain assistance from the European Union. In 2002, the European Union declared 580 million euros assistance, but that was the declaration. The realization and the absorption was quite different amount. So, as I said, we are doing as much as we can. The burden is on a single border crossing point between Macedonia and Serbia, which is primarily used for tourists entering the Greek territory. We are, at the beginning there were some difficulties in terms of the physical control of the refugees. Now we have implemented certain system that allows for more or less peaceful transition of the refugees through the Macedonian territory in an organized manner, with organized transport using trains, buses, and different vehicles. 4 or 5 months ago, most of them would walk through the territory or use the bike to cross the Macedonian territory. Immediately, the Macedonian government adopted a law which allows for 72 hours period of legal transition through the Macedonian territory in order to avoid situations of treating these individuals as illegal immigrants. So in an organized manner, we are, in a way, passing the ball to Serbia. Serbia is in a similar situation since the direction of movement of the refugees is north or northwest. The situation has caused certain difficulties not only in the Western Balkans, not only in Macedonia. It has caused difficulties in Austria, in Germany, in Sweden, in Denmark. We are working together in exchanging information primarily with our friends from Serbia, but also with the authorities from the European Union. Our security services are working together with them in order to coordinate all the efforts. I cannot say that we are coordinating our efforts with other countries which are on the way to Macedonia, but we are trying to establish a certain level of communication there too. And what we need in the time to come is a common European effort of the European Union and the countries from the Western Balkans, because if there is no common European response to this crisis, we are not able to get any results. As you have seen in the past months, there are different methods of dealing with the refugees. There are different methods of controlling the border. We have not erected a wall. We have not closed the border. We have not implemented a new criminal law, and we are not intending to do so. Macedonia has a certain history where the Macedonians themselves have been refugees in the past, and we are well aware of what a refugee status means and what the difficulties of the refugees are. Maybe Mr. Kolski can share more views on that in his elaboration. So, although we are a country of 2 million, and although we are facing huge challenges, both logistical and financial, and also political, we have no intention of avoiding our responsibilities, and we will continue to do whatever it takes to help these refugees and to work together with the European countries for a common response. However, the experience so far in the last months has not been the best one, and we are hoping that in the next weeks and months the European Union is going to get together and think more seriously about this issue. It is one thing that you're analyzing the situation in Syria. It's a different thing when you're analyzing the situation in Macedonia, but it's a whole different thing when you analyze the situation when the refugees are at your territory. So maybe nobody in Germany or Sweden or France was thinking about this refugee crisis while they were watching that the refugees have entered Greece or Macedonia or Serbia, but when they are already in their countries, they might think of dealing with the situation in a better manner. So of course, there is a different aspect of why are the refugees coming to Europe, but it's maybe an idea for a future discussion. What has to be done in the Middle East in order to stop the refugees coming to Europe, and we are hoping that we'll get more serious response in terms of the logistics and in terms of the finances. So far, several million euros have been spent from the Macedonian budget to deal with the refugees and to help them. We have 2 or 3 times a week refugees giving birth to in the Macedonian hospitals on the border. We are helping them, and we have established a special camp with medical assistance right at the border. And although the weather is getting worse, we are not expecting that this wave of refugees would decrease or stop in the winter, or autumn or winter months. What has been certain new information is that they might stop using the boats as a transport means through the Aegean Sea. They might try to enter Bulgaria and then Macedonia or Serbia to get through to Central and Western Europe. So, as I said, we are well aware of our responsibilities, and we are hoping that the other countries, especially those that are members of the European Union, would become more aware of their own responsibilities, so that we can work together and help all these thousands of innocent people who are just looking for a better life.
Thank you, Ambassador. Appreciate it. And Ambassador Matkovic, please.
Thank you, Ashley. Your Excellency, Ambassador Naumovsky, thank you very much for this very kind and very nice speech, because most of the topics which you have mentioned is actually shared with Serbia, and I agree with most of what you have said. Mr. Koloski and Ms. Dadarti, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be with you today. Although the complexity of the topic which we are going to discuss influences in many aspects not only the Western Balkans, but the European Union as a whole. It also presents a test for the global approach. It also presents a test for the global approach towards the issue of migration, either in the form of refugees or economical migrants. Parallelly with the ongoing crisis, we are witnessing.
You can put it on your collar, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think this one is working as well.
Okay. Thank you. Parallel with the ongoing crisis, we are witnessing attempts to find the right answer and the most appropriate solution to the burning issue of mixed migration. The term mixed migration is being used because it is obvious that right now we are facing a prevailing number of refugees from various crisis spots combined with economical migrants. Due to the current migration torrents, Serbia is among the most vulnerable countries. Although we are not the final destination for the largest number of migrants and refugees, we are located at the center of the so-called Western Balkans migrant route. This route is the route through almost all migrants and refugees are fleeing from the Middle East, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and other countries hit by the crisis and wars, and are heading to the countries of Western and Northern Europe. It is important to notice that the number of migrants on the Western Balkan route were constantly rising since 2009, and thus this is not entirely a new problem. What is essentially new is that in a few last months we are facing a dramatic increase of their numbers. This increase is such that the number of migrants on this route have equaled, if not exceeded, the so-called Mediterranean route, which until the current crisis presented the main entry door for migrants and refugees into the EU. An additional problem is that until the current crisis, the needs of the countries on this route, including Serbia, were often neglected and underestimated. Western Balkans migration route also has a specific political and legal geography. Unlike the Mediterranean route, the entry and exit points on this route are EU countries, Moreover, those countries are also part of the Schengen Agreement. While the significant, if not the main part of the transiting burden is being put on the countries such as Serbia and Macedonia, which are non-EU members. Using the figures from the beginning of this year until October 8, the Republic of Serbia has registered over 200,000 irregular immigrants. In the past few weeks, up to 5,000 illegal migrants enter the country daily. This presents an increase of 8.6 times or 860% compared to the whole of 2014. Of this number, about 190,000 have expressed their intention to seek asylum, but just about 600 actually did so, which reinforces the projection that neither Serbia nor other Western Balkan countries are their final destination. The tendency is such that these numbers are only will not subside, only to increase. Currently, by countries of their origin, the migrant structure is as follows. 61% of them are from Syria, almost 20% from Afghanistan, 7% from Iraq, 2.8% from Pakistan, 2.5% from Somalia, and 6.4% from other countries. This structure changes daily, but the refugees from Syria still present the prevailing majority. When it comes to the social structure of the transiting migrants, according to the available data, the majority of the Syrian nationals are coming from the middle-class social strata. This leads to estimations that if there are no stabilization, the arrival of the waves consisting of the lower social strata is yet to be expected. We are trying to adhere our obligations stemming from both international instruments such as the Convention of the Rights of Refugees from 1951 and Protocol of the Status of Refugees from 1967, as well as from our own regulation, the Asylum Law of 2008 and the Law on Foreigners also from 2008. Furthermore, our new law on asylum, which will be fully compliant with the EU directives, is scheduled to be adopted in the first quarter of 2016. Reacting to the crisis, the Serbian government has implemented a number of measures. An interagency working group dealing with the problem was established on June 22nd. An action plan in case of increased influx of immigrants was adopted on September 4th and presented to the EU. A reception center in Preševo on the border with Macedonia was opened on July 8. A center for urgent assistance for migrants was established in Kanjiža near the border of Hungary on August 12. Several locations providing help to migrants were also opened with the help of local governments in Subotica towards the Hungarian border and in Zaječar towards Bulgaria, as well in the capital city of Belgrade. The Serbian government has also decided to send extraordinary budgetary aid to local governments which are facing the high influx of immigrants. In order to prevent illegal entry into Serbia, the Minister of Interior has sent additional forces of border police and gendarmerie to the border with Macedonia, Hungary, and recently to the border with Croatia. Also, there was an increase in the entry of illegal immigrants from the Republic of Bulgaria, which has put an additional strain to our policing activities. However, we have to underline that unlike in some other cases, the Republic of Bulgaria respects its obligation undertaken by the Agreement of Readmission and accepts a certain number of persons who were found to have arrived from their territory. Aside from purely policing measures, our Ministry of Interior has already taken action to improve a national asylum system by increasing the number of officers on the National Asylum Office in order to speed up work on pending applications. Increasing the number of police officers who work on registration duties in order to avoid long waiting lines, especially for the most vulnerable groups. Enabling a faster access to other types of assistance in the reception centers and improving the electronic registry system. On the financial side, we are grateful to the EU for a humanitarian aid of about 1.5 million euros dedicated to Serbia and Macedonia, as well as to the bilateral aid that countries like Germany, Switzerland, and Norway sent to us. However, we have to underline that Serbia, as a non-EU member, does not have access to relevant EU funds, and thus part of these assets were just redirected from already existing projects in this area. Up to now, Serbia largely bore the brunt of the migrant crisis alone. For instance, during the past 4 months, the basic cost for the registration of migrants and providing food for them amounted to 20,000 euros a day. Total costs are projected much higher, taking into account that operating only one reception center on a monthly basis is estimated at 500,000 euros. Aside from humanitarian, social, and financial aspect, we are also have to be aware that this crisis carries a set of security-related intricacies. On one hand, there is a risk that ISIL or some other terrorist groups will use this migratory wave to infiltrate European countries. That underlines the necessity of intensifying communication, coordination, and data exchange between EU countries, countries of origin, and transiting countries. On the other side, such scale of migration crisis presents a challenge in combating and eliminating various forms of human trafficking that are almost inseparable from this situation. In a nutshell, all of the things I have mentioned mean that migrants who enter our territory are being registered and provided with accommodation, food, and medical aid. Our general approach is to demonstrate on all levels our willingness to take our part of the responsibility and to properly react to the huge influx of migrants, while at the same time having in mind our own limited capabilities. I would like to underline that we are doing this in a situation when the Serbian citizens themselves are faced with harsh measures of fiscal and budgetary consolidation that include decrease of pensions and wages in the public sector. At the same time, we are taking care of about 500,000 refugees and internally displaced persons from the wars of the 1990s. In such a situation, we are trying to do our best to provide proper reception, food, temporary shelter, medical care, and medication to the migrants, as well as information on their asylum procedure with full respect for their human rights. The government of the Republic of Serbia, in cooperation with the Red Cross of Serbia, international partners, and NGOs, made and will make every effort within its capabilities to provide assistance to migrants during their stay in Serbia. The way in which we have dealt with this pressure and the various aspects of the migrant crisis, namely our approach and empathy that was demonstrated so far, was very positively evaluated by the EU institutions and EU member states, as well as by the migrants themselves and the Arab countries. While this might make us proud, it is obvious that the burden we bear during this crisis is becoming increasingly difficult. Having in mind everything I have mentioned, it is clear that for a country of our capacities, this is already a huge burden. In the case of a prolonged influx of new migrants, and without the help from other interlocutors and partners, this additional weight will at one point pose the question of sustainability of our system. On a more positive note, we have received good signals from the EU high-level conference, Eastern Mediterranean Western Balkans route, that took place in Luxembourg on October 8. Aside from renewed diplomatic efforts to tackle the Syrian crisis, it was underlined that more financial and practical support is needed for the transit countries in the Western Balkans, with special emphasis to Serbia and Macedonia. It was reiterated that the transiting countries in the Western Balkans are under enormous pressure and immediate first-line humanitarian assistance has been promised. The aim of the EU is also to improve reception and accommodation facilities, provide access to basic services, and tailor support to the most vulnerable. It was also mentioned that the scope of the EU Trust Fund established for Syria might be extended to the Western Balkans. We are remaining hopeful that in the following months these measures will be fully implemented. On our side, as chair of the OSCE in 2015, Serbia has put this issue high on the agenda of the organization. a joint meeting of all three committees of the OSCE, the Security Committee, the Economic and Environmental Committee, and the Human Dimensions Committee dedicated solely to the migration crisis, was held in Vienna on October 6th. In this capacity, Serbia is also closely cooperating with the UNHCR. The necessity of strengthening the cooperation between these two organizations was reiterated by our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Ivica Dačić. Going back from the global to the local and regional politics, it is also clear that the current crisis has demonstrated an additional disturbing capacity. That is, to destabilize in a matter of days relations among countries while activating some old animosities. Unfortunately, as the Croatian example shows, those were relations that took years to stabilize and improve. Consequently, all the experiences we had, either directly or indirectly during the crisis, have demonstrated to all of us that the solution or the solutions for the crisis cannot be based on partial or local steps such as closing the borders or building fences. Cooperation and coordination, both within the region and with the international community, with emphasis on the EU and the UN, is a must. My country has shown willingness to take responsibility and to react to the crisis. However, we are profoundly aware that no country alone can carry such a huge burden. Therefore, the countries of the region need solidarity, assistance, and support, including financial, of our developed partners. On a more global scale, aside from the greater solidarity, there should be an increased readiness for political response to the source of the crisis. That means more readiness to seek political solutions and for creating conditions for sustainable peace and development at the source. The alternative to such action is much worse, and that would lead to further deterioration of the situation and degenerate into a humanitarian crisis with hardly conceivable magnitude and consequences. Thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Nato, I will turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a lot of coffee because this is a very, delicate topic, and I applaud ABA Roli, Ashley, Nikki, Zlata, Unerkova for really welcoming their doors to this topic and inviting us to speak. Because definitely we need a more unified approach between the U.S. and the European Union on this topic. I am, privileged to sit on this table with Ambassador Naumovsky and Matkovic and Nikki, and I hope you're doing well on jet lag. And so, in addition, I also want to thank my fellow Gavin Kopel, and this has been a great collaboration, particularly that Global Diaspora Week is this week. It's an initiative between the State Department and USAID and the International Diaspora Engagement Alliance. And so we're glad that this event is on their agenda. And for us as the United Macedonian Diaspora, we want to do what we can as citizens of the United States to help our homeland Macedonia, and actually Ambassador Matkovic was actually at one of our first events in 2011 in talking about the challenges of Southeast Europe. I can't speak on the legal implications of this issue, and I'm sure Nikki's going to touch on that, but I do want to talk about the security implications. And with that, I think we can all agree on this table that the resolution of this refugee crisis is viable only if responsibility is shared. And so, we've noticed a lot of media coverage on this event and this crisis, particularly attention to Macedonia and Serbia over the course of probably the summer. And I think it's very key to send out a message to everybody that it's imperative to refrain from the urge to center attention on a single player and rather focus on understanding the broader context that catalyzed this refugee crisis. the European Union's lack of decisive action, and I apologize, I can speak a lot more frank probably than the ambassadors on the table, and in the face of this crisis, is definitely concerning. There hasn't been a unified approach. We can give as an example Germany of willing to take almost 1 million of these refugees, which are refugees and then eventually are going to be migrants in these countries, and the likelihood that these migrants, refugees are going to return back to their homeland is highly unlikely. And so our organization has always called for a prompt, unified EU response and urges the international community, also led by the US, to address the underlying problems that led to this crisis. Now, let me paint a picture for all of you, and I know and both ambassadors definitely try to look at and discuss their perspective. But obviously, these countries are, Macedonia 2.1 million, Serbia about 8 or 9 million. This is, they're facing something that is unprecedented in recent times. Obviously, the Bosnian crisis and the refugees that came out of the Bosnian crisis and the Kosovo crisis. Macedonia, as the ambassador mentioned, close to a quarter of its population in refugees. But let's go back a little bit. The history of the World War I and World War II and the Greek Civil War, these countries have the experience that is needed to take on this crisis. Unfortunately, they don't have the resources to take on this crisis. In the beginning of the summer, Macedonia, I remember reading the reports, was welcoming anywhere between 300 and 500 refugees, and all of a sudden that turned to 3,000 to 7,000 a day, and most recently 10,000 a day, and these same refugees that are coming from Greece, going to Macedonia, going to Serbia. So it's the same amount of refugees that are passing through these borders, and unfortunately the EU funds towards all these three countries has been truly inconsistent given the requirements that these countries or the requirements that are being placed on these countries to deal with this crisis. And obviously all of us have a responsibility to try to be human people and try to welcome these refugees with open arms. Unfortunately, the infrastructure doesn't really allow this to happen. I mean, Gevgelija, which is the first border town these refugees, migrants enter from Greece, is a population of 16,000 people, and so you're talking about almost double nearly a day in refugees that are crossing, and like I said, the vastly insufficient infrastructure doesn't allow this town and also this Macedonia and the police and the armed forces to deal with this issue. And so I will touch on the isolated instances that have happened and we've seen in the media. But first I want to talk about this sort of amount of funds that these countries are receiving from the EU, which is incredibly, obviously it's this incredibly complicated issue. And the funds that it receives are, if I could use the terminology, laughably inadequate. And so, and I apologize, I mean, Serbia obviously gets a lot more funds, it's a larger country, and then also, unlike Macedonia, Serbia is it has started opening the chapters of EU accession. Macedonia, unfortunately, and those of you that do not know, Macedonia has been blocked from joining NATO since 2008 and joining the EU since 2009 consistently every year, and so we'll see what happens during the Warsaw Summit, and we hope that Macedonia will get an invitation to join NATO, and hopefully at the December ministerial, the EU is going to send a stronger signal to Serbia and Macedonia on its path to EU membership. Unfortunately, the presidency of the EU, when coming in, did say that we don't see enlargement happening for the next 5 years, obviously putting a damper on the countries of the region, which are really wanting and have this urge to join the EU and want to be part of this this family. So Macedonia receives less than a quarter of the funding from the EU that Serbia does for the management of this crisis, even though each country experiences a similar number of migrants. In addition to the 8.2 million euro package that Serbia is receiving through 2020, and I believe more funding, as both ambassadors mentioned, will be received, hopefully, to expand its capacity for migrants, reforming its asylum system and to improve border security. Serbia was granted about 630,000 euros to address issues related to the influx of migrants and improve infrastructure, including waste disposal, water, and sanitation. In comparison to Serbia, the only funding Macedonia received from the EU was a mere 90,000 euros. In stark contrast is the funding that Greece receives to address issues related to the migration crisis. Despite the fact that most refugees cross Greece to enter Macedonia, Greece receives over 5,000 times more funding than Macedonia. In the period from 2014 to 2020, Greece will receive 474 million euros to address issues related to this crisis. And so, I want to make sure that you all understand like I said, the inconsistencies with the funding that these countries are receiving compared to those that are EU members. And I think once you're a part of the family, you receive a lot more. But the EU countries are expecting that Macedonia and Serbia act as EU countries, even though they have lack of funding. And so now, I heard some media articles about the fence that Macedonia's government was planning to build, and we confirmed it. I'm sure the ambassador will talk. Macedonia never planned to build a fence around its border. Obviously Hungary has pledged and is building this fence, and as you can see, there is this want from the refugees to try to progress as fast as possible to Germany before this fence is built. There has been a sort of welcoming arms among the citizens of these countries. UNHCR has described a lot of positive stories of individuals, in Serbia and in Macedonia, individuals like Gabriela Andreevska and Lencha Zdravkin, who have been sort of mentioned in a lot of media reports, Al Jazeera and whatnot, for really being welcoming of these refugees and providing daily support. And so the Macedonian Red Cross, the Serbian Red Cross have had huge problems in recent years given the flooding that has been taking place in these countries. And so now, in order for these Red Crosses to be able to deal with this crisis, they need a lot more funding, and so we cannot expect that they're going to be as adequate as possible to deal with this if they do not get the appropriate funding. And now that winter is coming, we're going to need a lot more to deal with this, because the weather conditions are going to get a lot harsher, and then the EU is going to want more capacity from Macedonia and Serbia in terms of camps and tents and heating and whatnot, because they're not going to be able to go by foot as a lot of the refugees, or as easily by train given current situations. I will talk about the response for the policemen that the media has been reported to be beating refugees and all that during the Q&A. But I do want to sort of conclude with that, again, the resolution of the current crisis is viable only if responsibility is shared. No single country can rely solely on its own resources to solve a problem as complex as this. organization stresses that if the EU and also the US wants to retain its position as a powerful global player, that it is genuinely committed to the promotion of peace, democracy, and human rights, it must provide a unified and resolute response to the current migrant crisis. This includes providing adequate support to Macedonia, Serbia, and other non-EU states, which is crucial in ensuring that governments meet their obligations under international law to treat all refugees with dignity. And so I'm pleased that the US, President Obama's administration, has pledged to take in more refugees. And I know that we are expecting the US to take in a lot more refugees, but I do want to mention, and this comes from the American standpoint, the US has consistently taken hundreds and thousands of refugees after every single crisis that has happened since World War II, and the U.S. is one of the countries that most people want to come to, migrants and immigration. And so obviously the U.S. Cannot be asked to be taking even more when this is sort of on the border of Europe. And so the European countries need to have a lot more consistency in taking these refugees. And I understand that there are security implications, particularly with ISIS and ISIL, but I also want to stress that this is not just a religious community that are being refugees. There's also not just Islamic faith, but also Christian faith refugees. And so I think that it's our obligation or the EU and the US to do a lot more, but the EU needs to do a lot more, not just the US, and the US always being seen and looked to as the one that has to take in refugees and take in the problems of the wars of the region when all have a shared responsibility. And so I hope that sort of painted the picture from our perspective. And I know that given time that I have to cut short, but the Q&A I'm sure will be a lot more engaging. So thank you.
Before we move on to the Middle East and kind of learn more about the origin of a lot of the people who are transiting, I just wanted to pose a question to our three sort of Balkan representatives here. The reason people leave is very complicated, and they're often leaving very tragic circumstances. But in terms of the EU accession and NATO accession, is it possible to see this situation as tragic as it is for many of the refugees, but as sort of a bright spot in terms of helping Macedonia and Serbia to find a basis for more cooperation with the EU, to kind of look at this crisis as a concrete way that agencies and entities within the EU can cooperate more effectively and form maybe the basis for future kind of cooperation on the EU accession level?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's a good question. Although we are not yet part of the EU, we are intending to become one at a certain point in the future. What is really interesting is that both Macedonia and Serbia have passed through years of rigorous reforms in order to get the so-called visa liberalization with the EU. Having the pleasure to be part of the government when Macedonia received this decision, together with Serbia and Albania, I can assure you that for a number of years, the Macedonian authorities, together with the other countries, have implemented a number of reforms in terms of not only political reforms, mostly in the aspect of border management, control of the borders, biometric documents, and efficiency of the services that are dealing with the control of the border. So the aim is to prepare these countries that are going to become members of the European Union, to prepare them to control their borders in a European manner. what we are witnessing is that the candidate countries like Macedonia and Serbia are controlling their borders better than the existing European Union members. So Macedonia was one of the countries that received the best grades from Frontex, that is the association that deals with the common control of the external European borders. And we are continuing to follow all these European recommendations. And we have successfully realized a number of projects, not only in the border control management, but also in the cooperation of the intelligence services, in the cooperation of the in the fight against organized crime, in the area of fight against violent extremism or terrorism. So we have proven our commitment and dedication to work together with the European partners. What we would like to see is a stronger commitment and implementation of that commitment on behalf of the European Union.
Thank you, Ashley, for the question. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Naumovsky, and I think that as it is, maybe as you said, as tragic as this event is, it's an opportunity to further promote our cooperation with the EU. But without this crisis, we have also already done a great cooperation with them, and we have done reforms which are in actually accordance with the highest European standards. So as Mr. Naumovsky mentioned, border control and immigration policies, as well as fight against organized crime and human trafficking, is done in very close cooperation with the EU countries, and the information between our intelligence services and the intelligence services of other countries is also present already. So this might be as a motive to further promote this cooperation, but without the crisis, we have already had a great job. We have done a great job with the EU. So I think we will continue to do that, and Serbia and Macedonia, as also Mr. Naumovsky has mentioned, we are acting in a more humane way and controlling our borders, I think, better. We will not build, as Macedonia, Serbia will not build a fence ever, and as a country which also has experienced a lot of troubles in the past, and people were forced to leave their home, and we have accepted as Serbia a lot of refugees from Croatia, from Kosovo, from Bosnia and Herzegovina. We know how these people feel, so we are doing our best to accommodate them and to help them, because they are in a dire need to be protected. And what is their final destination, it's upon them. Within our capabilities, we are ready to accept a number of them who are willing to stay in Serbia, but as I said, our capabilities are really limited. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. I think, again, the relationship between the EU and these two countries has to strengthen a lot more than what it is right now. Obviously, Serbia doesn't have the sort of blockage that Macedonia does, and I envision that Serbia is going to progress a lot more quicker than Macedonia as a result of this, and so I think that the EU needs to ask its current members, like Greece, to sort of help open the door and be the sort of leader in the region of what we've required Greece to be during the Thessaloniki Agenda of 2003, when Greece pledged that by 2014 or 2013, actually 10-year, that all the countries of the region would join the EU or progress as EU candidate status. Unfortunately, that is not the case today, and so we saw how Croatia responded to this crisis by closing the border, which impacted significantly trade, and sort of both countries lost millions of euros of trade and possible investments and whatnot as a result of this. And so the EU all have to have a unified approach to this. And so we don't want a situation where these countries will enter into some kind of chaotic situation as a result of the migrants coming, and if the influx grows even a lot more, which UNHCR is predicting, and if there isn't enough funding, these countries are going to face further problems, which, obviously, being 25 years independent, and trying to become more democratic countries, and improving rule of law, and anti-corruption and whatnot, which the EU has been helping these two countries meet, I think it's going to deteriorate if these countries do not get the ample support and sufficient funding. And so, yes, there is a prime opportunity for the EU to show leadership, particularly its leadership on EU enlargement. And unfortunately, the only foreign minister, actually the two foreign ministers that visited the region to visit any of these refugee camps were the Austrian foreign minister and the Bulgarian foreign minister. Where are the others to sort of come and step in and talk about these issues and say that these are the countries that are refugees are entering these non-EU countries from EU countries, and we need a joint response to this. And so, yes, I think it's a prime opportunity, and I think the next few months, particularly the December ministerial, is going to be important for the future of both. So,
thank you very much. Yep. Thank you, Joe. We're going to switch regions now and look at more of the origin of many of the refugees who are coming. As the ambassador from Serbia mentioned, 61% are from Syria. That's sort of on a given day. And so Nikki's going to talk a little bit about ABA Rolly's efforts in Turkey working with the refugees from Syria.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you to my distinguished panelists today, and thank you so much to Ashley, Zlata, Sasha, and the rest of my colleagues. I thought today that I would talk about 5 different topics, and I hope I can do this in 15 minutes. But first, I would like to give you a little bit more of the background of the situation of the Syrians living in Turkey, then go into a little bit more about their legal needs, of course, then the ABA Rolly program and responding to those legal needs, some of the challenges that we're facing in this program, which I think can also be some of the similar challenges that will be faced in the Balkans as well. And then finally, maybe some of the lessons learned and how we can also respond to the situation in the Balkans and then also the rest of Europe. So first, starting with the Syrian situation in Turkey, about right now, there are about 2 million registered refugees in Turkey. And when I say registered, I mean that they're registered with the Turkish government and not so much UNHCR. About 11% of the Syrians living in Turkey are in camps, which means that about 90% of them are actually living outside of camps. About 60% are in southeast Turkey, and the majority now are starting to slowly move into other parts of Turkey, including Izmir and Istanbul. And the reason for that is primarily because as it's been about 4 or 5 years, the idea for many Syrians is that it's becoming more and more difficult to go back to Syria, so they probably will end up staying in Turkey or moving toward Europe. Turkey is a party to the Refugee Convention of 1951 and the additional protocol. However, with one big caveat. The caveat is that the Refugee Convention, according to Turkey, only recognizes European refugees and not Syrians. That being said, the Turkish government does have something called the Law on Foreigners and International Protection, and then additional regulations and protocols in place that do provide certain guarantees to Syrians, such as non-refoulement, which, for those of you that don't know, means that they will not be returning Syrians back to Syria, knowing that harm will probably come to them, and also some other guarantees, such as even though they entered Turkey not quite legally, they'll not be prosecuted for that. There also are conditional refugee status, and that's mostly for, the Iraqis and Iranians. For the Iraqis, in 2014, in December, there were only about 22,000, but now in August 2015, there are about 110,000 according to UNHCR, which shows that that number is drastically growing due to the situation in Iraq right now. Turkey initially thought that they could maybe handle the problem on its own. And about in 2013, they realized that they would need a lot more help, and they started opening up their doors to international NGOs like ABA Roli, and also to international organizations and national organizations. That being said, the Turkish government is very much in charge, and they're the ones that provide the registration, not UNHCR, although UNHCR is a big partner to the Turkish government. And they also have complete control of the camps as well. As I said earlier, in spring 2013, the Turkish parliament passed the Law on Foreigners and International Protection, which actually took place in 2014. And in the fall of 2014, they introduced the Temporary Protection Regime. And this guarantees non-punishment of illegal entry, as I mentioned, and stay. But it also provides a lot of access to services, and these include education for children, which is free health services, social services, shelter, which includes the camps and accommodation centers, and access to the labor market, although I should point out that secondary or tertiary legislation has not been passed, so the actual ability for Syrians to work in Turkey is actually quite difficult. At first, the law was very difficult to understand and to follow. It was very confusing, not just for the Syrians, but also for Turkish legal practitioners. The Turkish government did create a new ministry, the Directorate General for Migration Management, or GDMM, or DGMM, or anything that has DG and MM in it. This has been a really great ministry for taking all the different issues that Syrians are facing. However, a lot of work still needs to be done in order to help the DGMM better understand the legal situation for Syrians living in Turkey. And that's actually a great segue into my next part of the legal needs of refugees that we've encountered. The biggest one, of course, is the general understanding of the law on the Temporary Protection Regime, or TPR, what that means, what rights Syrians have, how they can access their rights. And then, unfortunately, the practices evolve depending on where you live. So, for example, a Syrian living in Gaziantep in southeast Turkey might encounter a very different situation on how to access free education for their children as a Syrian living in Istanbul. There's also an access to legal assistance problem that we've seen. There are a lot of people that are very, very scared to report issues, to report crime, to actually go to authorities and report anything that might happen to them. And the fear is, what we've seen, ABA Roli has seen, is the fear comes from, they're worried about being sent back to Syria. They're worried about people finding out where they live. They're worried about just living day to day, and so these crimes are not often reported. There's also issues regarding family law. We discussed earlier, I believe, that a lot of Syrians are giving birth along the migration route. Of course, they're giving birth in Turkey as well. And the question of how to register that birth, how to register deaths, how to register marriages and divorce. We've seen in the news a lot of issues of polygamy and Turkish men taking on second, third, fourth wives. Polygamy is illegal in Turkey, so what does that mean for that second, third, or fourth wife? And what does it mean for the children that come out of these second, third, and fourth marriages? And we're seeing also, very sadly, a new generation of stateless children that don't really have a home to go back to or don't have a nationality or citizenship. There are also issues, as I discussed earlier, of labor. As I said, there is an ability or right for Syrians to work in Turkey. However, it's very difficult to access actual work and to access that right. Housing issues are another big, big problem that we've seen. A lot of Syrians are being exploited by landlords. They're paying way too much for rent. Their rent's being increased. Many Syrians are being pushed into once very small housing quarter. There's been lots of exploitation by opportunistic landlords. Another issue is registration. Now, depending on what report you see, anywhere from 15 to 30% of Syrians are not registered. And this means that they're not able to access these very important rights that are provided to them. There are many reasons why Syrians aren't registering. The fear issue is one of them. And this also is just from a lack of information. They just don't know what registration really means and what it can guarantee them. And that is another great segue into ABA Roley's program and what we're doing. So we are working with bar associations throughout Turkey, primarily in the southeast, and training lawyers to be able to provide legal awareness sessions and legal assistance to Syrians. We've trained at this point about 74 lawyers, and we are continuing to train as many as we can. And we're also working with partner organizations and community centers in southeast Turkey as well as in Istanbul. The community centers are funded by the State Department, they're funded by the EU, they're funded by foundations, and what they do is that they're big community centers and they provide psychosocial assistance, education, skills training like sewing, language classes, and now they are also offering legal awareness sessions by ABA Roley trained lawyers. The sessions focus on some of the issues I discussed, including labor issues, access to education, family issues. They run the gamut. And we also have separate issues that are focused just for vulnerable populations, primarily women and children. And those sessions are there to talk a little bit more about sexual and gender-based violence, domestic violence, issues that face women disproportionately, such as citizenship, family law. And the idea is to really empower Syrians to be able to understand what their rights are under the Turkish law. And at this point, we have reached about 1,800 Syrians through 84 of our legal awareness sessions and 17 sessions for vulnerable populations. And that is a number that we started the program in April. And we're continuing to grow, and we have weekly or bi-weekly sessions. We also provide private legal counseling. So after every session, if a person or family has some private issues they would like to discuss with a Turkish lawyer, they're able to do so afterward. And at this point, we've reached about 350 Syrians that have come to seek legal advice. The amazing statistic to me is that the amount of people that are coming to our sessions, 80% of them, this is the first time they're actually receiving any sort of legal advice or legal help or legal awareness about what the temporary protection regime and the Turkish laws offer. So that really shows to us that there is a great need for Syrians to really understand the legal situation that they're in Turkey and how to be able to live day to day and access their rights under the law. We also have an SMS helpline. We are working with another group called Suktel, and they have provided a platform where Syrians are able to text in simple questions, legal questions, to Turkish lawyers. The questions are then translated from Arabic into Turkish. The Turkish lawyer can respond, and then those questions are sent back to the Syrian, of course, in Arabic. This is a program that we are trying to expand and which can definitely be expanded across into the Balkans and to the rest of Europe as well. And we also, as part of this, have a BLAST Know Your Rights campaign. So for the Syrians who come to the legal awareness sessions, we ask them, do you want to be part of this BLAST SMS? They say yes. We have about 2,000 numbers so far, and it's growing. And we send them SMS about their rights. So for example, did you know under registration, your child under 18 is provided free education in Turkey? We are also working with a few other websites and other apps to provide more information to Syrians about the laws in Turkey. We have about 8 different brochures on different legal topics that we also cover at our awareness sessions. We distributed about 7,000 of these, and we also have distributed another 10,000 brochures that are just focused on our SMS helpline. So some of the lessons that we've learned through this program, which I think can be imparted to any program that continues to do this type of work, the biggest one we've learned is trust and how to really gain the trust of the people that you're trying to help. And we've been able to do this very successfully through the partnerships we have with these community centers. Some of the other issues, which I have no doubt will continue to be issues, are language problems. And this is definitely a challenge that is going to remain. Most of the Syrians that we encounter do not know any English. Some of them do know some Turkish, and I think along the way that's going to continue to be a great issue. Another challenge is reaching women and children and to be able to respond to their specific needs, especially to address very, very sensitive and challenging issues. We've been able to do this instead of having sessions that say for women only or sexual and gender-based violence, come here to learn more. We try to have the sessions focus a little bit more on issues that we think that women are more likely to feel that pertain to them, such as family law, divorce, birth registration, death registration, and marriage. The other issue is bridging the gaps between Syrian laws and Turkish laws. So what might be completely acceptable by Syrian legal standards doesn't always work in Turkey, and a big one is marriage. So what might be recognized as a legal marriage in Syria is not necessarily legal marriage in Turkey. And the problem is that when people get married without having it properly registered by the Turkish government, that marriage is not recognized in Turkey, and then you have a whole host of issues that follow after that, including the birth of their children. Finally, as I discussed earlier, there's a real necessity to clarify and harmonize the law and the implementation of the law in different sections of Turkey, so it'll be the same across the board. One of the challenges that we've also seen is that some of the, depending on where a Syrian registers in Turkey, the particular guarantees that come with the TPR are not necessarily applied if that Syrian decides to move to a different part of Turkey. And so that's another really big issue, because a person might come from Syria and settle in Gaziantep for the first year of his or her life, but need to move to a different part, maybe to Istanbul, for a job or more family that lives there, and unfortunately those guarantees don't necessarily follow him or her. So finally, I would like to discuss a little bit more about the situation in Turkey and how that may be the same or different from perhaps the situation in the Balkans. The first thing that really comes to my mind is what we were discussing: why are the Syrians and other refugees and migrants leaving and moving toward the Balkans? And I think that's one of the real questions, and it's a very sensitive question, and there's a lot of different answers. But some of them that we've seen in our program is, first, the ability to work, or the inability to work in Turkey, although the law does permit it. Also, the situation in Turkey, as you've probably seen in the news, is becoming increasingly tense, and the Syrians are feeling that tension and are also thinking that it's time to leave and move on. There's also this concept that by moving toward Germany or Austria, there's a better standard of living, there are better benefits, and of course, again, there's more options to find work. Another issue is the lack of ability to seek asylum in Turkey. As long as the TPR regime exists, it's going to be very difficult for Syrians to be able to seek asylum. And then finally, the law itself, as well as the secondary regulations, have the word temporary in their name. And that is a little bit of a psychological effect as well. It sort of means to a person that this is only for the time being, so maybe this will one day end, or maybe they're going to send me back to Turkey from Syria, or maybe something will happen and I won't be able to have the same rights that I did before. And that's another problem, and it's another fear of a lot of the people living in Turkey, and maybe another reason why they're leaving. The other issues that we discussed, that while the majority of the people that are coming across to Europe are Syrian, there are, of course, Iraqis that are coming, people from Afghanistan and Africa as well. But by and large, their makeup is somewhat the same in the sense that they are mostly men, they're mostly young, and they come from varying levels of education. The major differences, of course, are the existence of the TPR in Turkey, and the fact that that is not, that's just unique to Turkey alone. And the question of how maybe ABA Rolly can continue to help along the way is, of course, our SMS platform, which has been very beneficial, and as we seek to grow it, we can continue to have the same sort of platform across Europe. Again, the legal awareness sessions have proved to be very effective and very helpful for the Syrians that are attending. Of course, the legal issues that will be addressed are a lot different. Instead of questions of citizenship, which seem to come up over and over again in our sessions, maybe it'll be more about how to seek asylum or how to stay or enter a country legally and stay there for 72 hours and be able to move on. And I think that pretty much covers it. I guess the last part that I just want to mention is the term refugees versus migrants. In Turkey, the Syrians there, because the Refugee Convention, as a Turkish government interprets it, does not actually have Turkish Syrians living in Turkey as refugees. That's a major issue. So it will actually never be called that Syrians are actually refugees in Turkey. But this is the way that we're addressing them in our program, and as I think they continue to move on, that will also be a continuing question of the issue of refugees versus migrants and the legal implications that follow.
Thank you. And one quick question for Nikki from me, selfishly, before we open it up for broader questions. We heard from our Balkan representatives about how they're cooperating with each other and cooperating with the EU on this crisis. But it sounds like Turkey is almost acting in isolation. Maybe I'm wrong. But is there cooperation with Turkey and neighboring states that are also hosting or resettling large groups of Syrian refugees? With Jordan, for example?
Well, what I think is interesting in the context of Turkey and Jordan is that when the Syrians started coming across in great numbers, they were actually mostly coming to Jordan and to Lebanon. In fact, when we started our project in 2014 in September, there were 800,000 Syrians living in Turkey, and now there's close to 2 million registered. And actually at the time we started our program, the majority of Syrians were in Lebanon. So the response, I think, about that is Turkey has turned more and more to the international community for assistance, whereas Jordan from the get-go was very open to UNHCR assistance and was working heavily with UNHCR. I can't speak for the Turkish government, so I can't say for sure the levels of cooperation among the different countries there. But I think as the situation has escalated and more Syrians and Iraqis are coming into Turkey, their approach has changed dramatically.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. I really appreciate your willingness to be with us and to share your thoughts. I think we'll open it up to questions if people have them. And maybe Zlata will use that mic, and we can pass this one around as we go. And please, before you ask your question, introduce yourself.
Thank you. Obret Kesic, the Director of the Republican Srpska Office here in Washington. I have 3 questions. The first to Ambassador Matkovic. Ambassador Malmosky mentioned the problem of refugees that are still in Macedonia from Kosovo and Metohija. Does Serbia have a similar situation with displaced people and refugees that have not been able to go back to their homes, not only Kosovo and Metohija, but also in other parts of the former Yugoslavia? And what are the numbers of that? And how does that affect any policies that are being developed? And secondly, there was also some mention of cost to the budgets of Macedonia. And I'm wondering, for both of the ambassadors, what is the cost to the budgets of dealing with this question? It may be more effective if you had numbers when you approach the EU or the US in talking about the needs in terms of talking about actual costs of the budget. In terms of speculation in the media, and I'm interested for any of the panelists, there's been talk that the EU countries are putting pressure on the non-EU countries in the Balkans to develop more permanent collective centers. Centers that would accommodate 10, 20,000 refugees for an in-depth, or it's supposed to be ideally for a temporary time, but it could be indefinite. Is that speculation in the media accurate? Are there any discussions underway with the EU for these centers and development of the centers? And finally, Manto referred to this, and I think it's the elephant in the room, and I have a slightly different take on the responsibility of the United States. I think that in many ways, the United States bears a large share of the responsibility, but has failed to stand up in meeting the challenges now of displaced people and refugees coming from areas where U.S. foreign policy was very active, and many would argue caused a lot of the problems that we're seeing now. And so with that in mind, what is the U.S. actually doing to support the countries in terms of money, in terms of resources? And one issue that wasn't dealt with on the security question, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the U.S. and the EU cooperated and developed reception centers. And part of it was security driven, to be able to screen people to determine any potential threat or also value, political value. Is that being done now on the ground?
Okay, you can go first. Thank you.
If I may take first, thank you very much, Obras, for these questions. As far as the number of refugees and internal displaced people from the former crisis from Kosovo and Bosnia-Herzegovina and Croatia, we estimate that there are still about 500,000 of them in Serbia, and most of them, they are trying to integrate into our system, and we are helping them in trying to find for them jobs and to accommodate them and to provide for their families. On the other hand, Serbia is the country which is encouraging these internally displaced people to go back to their own home country, to their origin. This was unfortunately a very small number of people, especially from Kosovo. About 5% of the total number of the internal displaced people from Kosovo in Serbia tried to go back, and of that 5%, less than half of them have succeeded. So it's a very big problem, and I think we should work more with the neighboring countries on that. Also, a similar situation is with Croatia, and maybe Bosnia-Herzegovina is the country which is accepting most of them, but still Republika Srpska, of course, one of the parts where these refugees came from. As far as the cost of the crisis is concerned, I don't really have some figures, but as I said, about 500,000 euros per month is the cost of running a refugee center, and about 20,000 euros daily is the cost of food which we are providing to them. This is rising, and as Mate also mentioned, by the coming of winter, and if there is another wave of refugees coming in the winter, the situation will be more complicated. So we need to provide them with some heated facilities when they can stay overnight, and that they are more human conditions. So the EU is trying to assist. I agree with the Meto that Serbia is getting much more than Macedonia. We are a bigger country, but the number of the refugees is more or less the same. So in that case, it may be unjust that Macedonia doesn't get more of these resources. But this is a huge burden to our economy, and also mentioned during the discussion earlier today, by closing the borders, especially by Croatia. They have closed the border not only for the refugees, but closed the border totally for the people to move there and for the goods. So we have lost millions of dollars of investment and opportunities in the trade, and this has a long-term effect. So, as I said in my discussion, that it took a long time to build this kind of trust between the two countries and to improve the relations, but it takes a matter of days to ruin that. And so we have to work together with these countries. Serbia is a country which wants to work with all the countries to resolve the problem. And this I'm saying always that this refugee crisis one day will be over, but we will stay one to another, and we have to live together. About these pressure from the EU about the more permanent collection centers, there were some ideas and some suggestions that Serbia, and I'm sure it was also said for Macedonia, should accept more of these refugees and to build a more permanent collection center. However, there was no, as far as my knowledge, there was no direct pressure to do that, but we are ready to discuss this issue. These people, as I said, are transiting to Serbia. Most of them, they don't want to stay, and if they do, we will solve this problem in a different way. So all the about of the 200,000 people which have crossed Serbia, only 600 has expressed their will to stay. And the responsibility of the U.S. It's a good question, because the U.S. should help, and it would be most welcome from Serbia if it could help more. During the visit of my Prime Minister, Mr. Vučić, here in September, this issue was raised in the discussion with Vice President Biden and the State Department, and the U.S. said that they are ready to assist in a much concrete way. However, I still have to meet with the officials at the State Department and the White House to discuss with them the forms of this assistance, but they have expressed their readiness to assist Serbia, and we are welcoming that very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the costs, they are similar to what Ambassador Matković mentioned. I can assure you that only for the cost for the additional police forces, Macedonia is spending $100,000 a day. So the additional police force is necessary for the control of the border. We are talking about, until now, 140,000 individuals that are staying 1, 2, or 3 days in the country. So at a given point, Macedonia has between 10 and 15,000 individuals at its territory. That's at least 45,000 meals and 45,000 or more bottles of water. Until now, we have 30,000 children, an additional 5,000 children without any, that are traveling without their parents. So you have approximately 40% are women, so it's not only the food and water, there are additional expenses, so several million until now and counting. And in terms of the announcements for permanent, more permanent refugee centers, I would agree that there were announcements, but no direct pressure. If there is a discussion on that, of course, we will do whatever it takes to examine this opportunity. However, sorry, they're not intending to stay permanently in Macedonia. Even if they do, nor Macedonia nor Serbia has any intention to avoid the responsibility. It was not Macedonia or Serbia where the citizens blocked the buses with the migrants. It is not Macedonia nor Serbia where the refugees were welcomed with Molotov cocktails. And it is not going to be the case, so whatever it takes, we'll do it in cooperation with our European partners.
Thanks, Obrad. I think the U.S. response, I want to clarify, definitely, taking refugees, I think, is a different question, because we've definitely taken our share of refugees in this country throughout, and I can assure you, even Macedonian refugees from Greece and other areas that have come in have been welcomed with open arms, and so obviously the administration has pledged, I guess, about 100,000 or so before 2017. Yes, perhaps the number can be larger, and we will be partnering up with the Arab America Institute later this month in Michigan. There's going to be a discussion on sort of what the U.S. response should be on this from an Arab and those countries affected. There will be a Turkish organization, Macedonian, I believe some Serbian and other organizations that will be part of this. Now, from a financial perspective, and then also its connections and diplomatic resources that it has, it definitely can help to maybe apply pressure for some of these EU countries to do their share or take their share of the burden, and also with the Arab countries to do a lot more as well, particularly those Arab countries that are financially capable of providing support. My question has always been, well, where is Bulgaria? Where is Romania? Where are some of these other countries that are EU and NATO members? What are they doing? And Greece, as much as the whole financial crisis and everything, they're also facing a lot of obstacles. And then they also have that Golden Dawn component, which is threatening a lot of these migrants and whatnot. And so that legal sort of implications, this is where the the US can sort of apply pressure to the EU to do a lot more in terms of sort of the legal mechanisms that these countries need to put in place and ensure for the safety and the human rights of these refugees coming in. And so definitely the US has a role, and I'm glad that ABA is hosting this in Washington, DC, and those of you that have been dealing with this issue, there hasn't been as much on this, and we've been preoccupied with other priorities, Russia and Ukraine and other things which are just as important to the security of Europe, but we do have to delve into this, and I think the ambassadors touched on the cost and all that, and I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you very much, Neto. Do we have another question, I think?
Good morning, I'm Stephanie Molina with USAID here in Washington. One question, you mentioned unaccompanied children, which is what I wanted to ask about for both of you. What is the policy in terms of when the governments or local governments encounter unaccompanied minors? Do you keep them in a sense and treat them and try to get them resettled with family, or do they just kind of continue on the path they previously had? So my question was on that policy. And then for Nikki, I was wondering, for those who are kind of coming out of Turkey into Europe, is it mostly folks who have been in Turkey for a long time and have kind of used up their resources, or like you said, have experienced some kind of change of heart and then moving on, or is it more folks that are new refugees coming out of Syria that see Turkey as kind of full, the no vacancy light is on, and so they're continuing moving through kind of in a more quick fashion?
Could I just pause there? Does anyone else have questions? Maybe we would do a group of questions, so maybe these three, if we can all keep track of all the questions. Thank you.
Sophia Orlowski, Freedom House. I had a question for both ambassadors and perhaps the other two speakers could contribute. What has been the role of local and national civil society organizations in Serbia and Macedonia in responding to this crisis? And what steps have the governments of both your countries made to coordinate with civil society organizations?
Okay, great, thank you. And did we have one more over here? One more question? No? Okay, great. Then maybe I can ask the ambassadors to talk about unaccompanied minors and the government policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the unaccompanied minors, as I said, there are so far 5,168 unaccompanied minors. They're usually registered, and they're traveling with a group from their town or village, or accompanied by a member of the wider family, and they just continue. In some cases, they are members of their immediate family are already inside the European Union, or at the final destinations are waiting for them. So they just receive their certificate and finish the paperwork, and then continue along with the group that they have arrived with. And regarding the civil society, the biggest activities on the Macedonian Red Cross, they have around 150 individuals permanently stationed at the border. They're working mostly together with the UNHCR, and they're providing food and primary medical assistance to the people that are in need. Of course, course, it's an additional contribution to the overall efforts in the country, and the government is thankful for their contribution.
Thank you for your question. As far as the unaccompanied minors, it's also the similar policies as in Macedonia. It's a very sensitive question because we have to address it in a way that these minors are not abused or somehow exploited for some labor or for something else. So we are approaching this issue very carefully, and I think if their parents are already in the EU, then we just register them and then let them go along with the group in which they have arrived. But if not, I am not sure whether we are trying to return them to Syria and to get them with their families. So this is actually a different approach if they are already in the EU or not. But we have a lot of these unaccompanied minors, and unusual big numbers. I mean, regarding this, as Mr. Nawosky has mentioned, some hundreds of them are arriving, and we are treating them in a different manner. As far as the civil society is concerned, Serbia is also, in Serbia we have the Serbian Red Cross, which is engaged mostly in these issues, working together with the UNHCR, and other non-governmental organizations are assisting a lot. So this is also an issue which is not only a governmental thing, but the whole society is engaged in this. So we are really trying to help them, and the civil society is doing its fair share on this. Thank you.
And I will just add a quick comment on that. My colleagues and I have been doing research in the Balkans to find out. We have an existing program, a regional program, that focuses on criminal defense, but we had been talking to our local partners, civil society, about what they were doing, what they were hearing, and it was amazing. Every organization who had been a partner in a past program was already doing something on the refugee issue. So whether it was sending out volunteer lawyers to just do some legal aid, find out what people's issues were, to working with the Red Cross and UNHCR to register people or to document them. So I think even apart from some massive organizational kind of cooperative effort, individual CSOs in the region have really stepped up, and I was really impressed to talk to almost all partners that aren't, or kind of maybe even tangentially related to human rights or legal issues. They were involved in this crisis. So it's heartening to see in both Serbia and Macedonia. I think the civil society is really bridging a gap in legal needs for these refugees. And Nikki, maybe you could address the Turkey question. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's a very good question. We've heard many different reasons why Syrians are moving on from Turkey into Europe, and it's predominantly the ability to find work, just the perception of better standard of living, more opportunity. The question of whether they're just kind of using Turkey as a transit point to keep going, or whether they're settling, and that's still information that we're seeking to try to gather and doing more research to understand, which would really help our program in being able to respond better to the needs of Syrians currently in Turkey, and as well as we continue to try to assist outside and into the Balkans and in Europe as well. And I can also address the civil society question in Turkey, as we are working very heavily with regional Turkish bars who are all very interested in helping provide assistance, legal counseling and legal assistance to the Syrians, and are very interested. There are also a plethora of humanitarian organizations, Turkish organizations, that are also providing aid. And then there are a series of Syrian organizations that are also working to provide assistance to the Syrians that are living in Turkey.
Just to touch on the children and then get to civil society. I used to work at a refugee camp with children during the Kosovo crisis in Radosha, Macedonia, and I think that since then, since the Kosovo crisis, and both countries have done tremendous work to sort of put a stop to human trafficking, and I think the State Department has recognized both countries, I believe, as tier 1 in sort of the combating human trafficking. And I think this crisis will be definitely a huge challenge to both in the region to ensure that status and nobody takes advantage of these children. In terms of civil society, I want to commend the role that civil society organizations have had in the region. I mean, I've noticed even on social media, I mean, there's tens and thousands of likes on some of these groups on Facebook and pages on supporting the refugees, and I've noticed in Macedonia and I believe in Serbia, without a doubt, that they've even translated sort of pamphlets into Arabic to and hand them out to a lot of these refugees to ensure that they know their rights, and then also access to water, housing, and whatnot. And I don't know what it is in Serbia, but in Macedonia they passed a law that you have to register within 72 hours in order to travel freely, and so that is a good 3-day sort of process. And so these organizations, I mean, are literally hand in hand with these police and armed forces. Like I mentioned, Gabriela Andreevska and Lencha Zdravkin, I mean, they're going and buying with their own money bread and water and whatnot. And there is I believe the SMS, although not from the legal, but the SMS in order to donate via phone to these civil society organizations to allow more funding for these tents and whatnot. And I know that some of these civil organizations have tried to even use that funding and have built their own tents to house these refugees at the border. And so I'm proud that they're doing everything that they can do in our human nature of helping these people that are in need. But definitely there's a lot of challenges, and I think also, given that you're from Freedom House, I think the media can play a larger role in ensuring that adequate information is brought out to the public in an open, transparent way.
Thank you, Mato. Do we have any other questions lingering? Anyone? Okay. Well, thank you so much. I think we've had a really good discussion, a good information and a better understanding of where the refugees are coming from, how the situation is in Turkey, and then on their path through the Balkans to Western Europe, what their challenges are, and I think what our challenges will be to respond to their needs. Thank you all to all of our speakers who took your time to share with us your perspectives and to respond to the excellent questions. And especially thank you to United Macedonian Diaspora for co-hosting the event with us as part of the Global Diaspora Week. And thank you also to the ABA Roli staff members who made this possible, especially Zlata Unakova. Thank you, Zlata, for all of your hard work on this effort. Thank you all for attending. Have a wonderful day. Thanks.
Thank you.